They buried the building in silence, as if silence itself could strangle memory. But silence cannot kill what was born in screams. You are about to hear of a place America pretended to forget, an orphanage in Pennsylvania where children never grew beyond 13 because no child ever survived that cursed number. You were not meant to hear this, but now you do, and that alone has already changed you. Like this, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because when the story ends, you will want to know you are not the only one awake inside the dark. The year was 1878. America was growing, building railroads, factories, schools, and hidden among the coal towns of Pennsylvania, an orphanage was erected not from love, but from necessity. The industrial machine needed workers. Accidents left widows and orphans in waves. And so a boarding home was built under the pretense of Christian charity. But from the first day the doors opened, shadows pooled in its corners. Children were brought in from Philadelphia, from Pittsburgh, from towns you have never heard of, carried in wagons and promised bread, bed, and discipline. Discipline was the word they used, but what it meant was obedience. And obedience was demanded not by caretakers, not by teachers, but by the building itself. Those who survived even a month in that place wrote that the walls groaned at night, that the iron gates locked themselves, that mirrors in the dormitories showed reflections that did not belong to the children standing before them. Yet the cruelest truth was this: no child ever grew beyond 13. Some vanished before, some sickened, some died of fevers the doctors could not name. And when one boy reached his 13th birthday, the next morning his bed was empty, sheets folded neatly, shoes placed at the edge of the mattress as if prepared for a journey. He was never seen again. 13 was the line, and the building demanded payment at that line. No child crossed it, not one. And yet the orphanage did not close. It thrived. More children were brought. More vanished. Priests blessed the halls. Politicians donated. Mothers wept outside the iron gates, begging for the return of children already swallowed by the silence. And the town learned to pretend it was normal. The building still stands. The silence still hangs. And tonight, you will walk inside it with me. The first records came from the town registrar, brittle pages of names, dates, deaths. The earliest entries list causes like lung fever, consumption, unknown illness. But the strange pattern is impossible to ignore. Each line ends before 13 years of age. The handwriting grows frantic in places, lines crossed out, names rewritten, as though someone tried to mask the truth but could not keep the ink from trembling. Locals whispered it was a curse, that the land beneath the orphanage had once been a burial ground, not of saints, but of workers entombed alive when a mine collapsed years before. Their families never recovered the bodies. The company sealed the shafts, and when the orphanage was built, it rose directly atop those graves. The earth below, poisoned by grief, demanded children in exchange for silence. Yet some insisted it was not the land, but the matrons themselves. Women dressed in black, faces veiled, voices sharp as needles. They were said to perform prayers in Latin no priest recognized, to ring bells at midnight when no service was scheduled, to lead the children in chants that echoed like ritual, not religion. The children, wide-eyed, repeated words they did not understand. And afterward, the youngest would weep, whispering that the walls had listened, that the shadows in the dormitories were no longer still. The hunger of the building revealed itself in rituals of order. Children lined up by height. Children forbidden to keep trinkets from their families. Mirrors covered until inspection days, then uncovered so the matrons could watch each child stare into the glass. Any who refused were beaten. Any who lingered too long were taken to the cellar. That cellar was not marked on blueprints. Yet every survivor remembered it. Narrow stairs spiraled down beneath the chapel. At the bottom, a door of iron, carved with 13 crosses. None of the children ever returned once taken through that door. And so the pattern remained. No child survived 13. And the town stopped asking why. The strangest testimony came from a janitor, decades later, when the orphanage had already been shuttered. He was an old man, bent, half-blind, but his voice cracked when he described the nights. He said the building pulsed like a living heart after sundown, its timbers groaning, its floors trembling. He swore the portraits on the walls shifted when unobserved, the painted children turning their heads, opening their mouths in silent screams. One night, he said, he followed the matrons after curfew. They carried lanterns and led a group of 12 children down into the cellar. He hid, trembling, watching from the stairwell. The matrons placed the children in a circle around that iron door with 13 crosses. They whispered in unison. The children's reflections shimmered on the polished floor as though it were glass. But one reflection did not match. It moved a moment later, a beat too slow, its eyes wide, its smile too sharp. The janitor fled. The next morning, 12 beds were empty. The matrons told the town the children had been adopted, sent to good Christian homes. But the janitor knew the truth. The floor of the cellar was wet, as though something beneath the door had fed. His testimony was dismissed as the rant of a senile man. But his words bled into the folklore of the town, and decades later, when researchers reopened the orphanage records, his account aligned too perfectly with the missing names. 12 gone in one night, always beneath the 13th cross. Not all the children vanished without sound. Some left marks. In the attic, carved into wooden beams, messages remain, scratched by desperate fingernails, etched with stolen nails. Don't look in the mirror. The bell is not for prayer. 13 means gone. And carved deepest of all, trembling letters that repeat, the cellar is a mouth. The carvings were discovered long after the orphanage closed, when historians began documenting the ruin. They revealed something chilling. The children understood what the adults would not admit. They knew they were offerings. They knew their 13th birthday was not a celebration, but a sentence. And still, the matron smiled, sang hymns, locked the gates. Survivors who escaped at 12, either by adoption or by running, later describe how they would count the days with dread. One girl said her dreams turned black weeks before her birthday. She dreamed of bells tolling, of a banquet table underground, of children seated in silence while shadows moved at the edges. She woke each night screaming. Her foster family tried to calm her, but she vanished anyway, days before turning 13. She had been safe, far from the orphanage, yet she was claimed all the same. This was not a building alone. This was a covenant. The covenant spread like rot. Priests who blessed the chapel fell silent afterward, refusing to speak of what they saw. One hung himself in the belfry, ropes swaying above the altar. His final note contained only 2 words, 13 waits. The politicians who funded the orphanage never cut support despite the whispers. They knew something, or served something, or feared something too great to resist. One senator's son was sent there, orphaned after his mother's death. He vanished before his 13th birthday. The senator gave no protest. Instead, he donated funds for expansion. Every disappearance deepened the building's hunger, until even the town itself began to warp. Shops closed on the 13th of each month. Bells tolled at 13 minutes past midnight. Miners swore they heard children's laughter echoing from shafts long collapsed. And parents, despite everything, still delivered their orphans to the gates, because to refuse was to invite the curse into their homes. Better to sacrifice the unwanted than to risk the chosen. And so the orphanage endured, a mouth that never closed, a silence that swallowed every question. But what lived behind that iron door of 13 crosses? That remains the question you must face. They say every building remembers. What holds whispers, stone keeps secrets. And in the Pennsylvania orphanage, the walls themselves were alive with memory. When investigators entered years later, they described the air as heavy, charged, as though breathing someone else's unfinished breath. Doors creaked open without touch. Floors released groans, as though children still shifted in beds that were no longer there. And in the chapel, one pew remained scratched with 13 straight lines, a countdown no one admitted carving. Legends grew that if you lit a candle in the chapel and left it to burn alone, it It would always gutter out at the 13th drip of wax. Some swore they saw figures seated in the pews, pale children watching silently with eyes too hollow, waiting for their turn that never ended. The town dismissed it as ghost stories. But ghost stories do not carve themselves into ledgers, do not line up with names, dates, vanished children. One woman, the daughter of a coal baron, tried to expose the truth in 1882. She wrote a pamphlet accusing the matrons of ritual murder, printed copies, spread them through neighboring towns. Within a week, she was found dead in her home. 13 stab wounds. Her pamphlets were seized, her presses burned. The orphanage gates remained open. The silence became law, and the law became survival. The cellar was the center of it all. Survivors who escaped described its stench, iron and mildew, and something sweeter, like spoiled fruit. The staircase descended too far for the foundation size, spiraling longer than the building should have allowed. Those who made it halfway down said they heard voices, children crying, but muffled, as if from beneath the stone itself. And sometimes, layered over those cries, a voice deeper, hungrier, counting slowly, always stopping at 13. When the matrons led children into that spiral, they carried lanterns. The light barely touched the walls. And at the base waited the iron door, carved with 13 crosses, each etched deeper over the years, the grooves worn smooth as though hands, small hands, had pressed against them, begging. One escaped boy said the matrons made the children kneel before the door and pray. But the words they used were not prayers he had ever heard. The syllables were jagged, older than the Bible, older than Latin, words that made his teeth ache when he tried to repeat them later. He said the iron vibrated, and a warmth spread through the stone, as if something behind it had stirred. He fled before the ritual ended, clawing his way out through a coal chute, breaking his arm in the process. His foster family later claimed he never spoke above a whisper again. The boy died at 12 years and 11 months. The deeper you trace the records, the more unnatural the coincidences. Entire groups of children gone in cycles, 12 at once, 7 at once, 4 at once, yet never a single one beyond 13. When questioned, the matrons always produced fabricated adoption papers, signatures that slanted wrong, seals that smudged. But no child was ever located in any neighboring county. No school recorded them. No church baptized them. It was as if they dissolved into the stone itself. And the town's complicity thickened. Coal miners swore their pay was docked if they questioned the orphanage. Priests who dared to demand entry into the cellar were reassigned to distant parishes. The sheriff never wrote a single report. And when a grieving father stormed the gates, demanding his son's return, the matron stood silently until he collapsed in the courtyard. His death was ruled a heart attack, but his chest bore 13 bruises, evenly spaced, as if fingers had pressed down with inhuman force. The newspapers refused to print the story. Yet the whispers persisted, carried in saloons and rail yards, in sewing rooms and coal shafts. Parents told their children, "Do not wander near the orphanage. Do not look toward its windows after dark. Do not count to 13. Because if you did, something would count with you." Some say the orphanage itself fed not only on children, but on the town. Crops failed every 13th season. Miners died in collapses that occurred at the 13th hour. Birth records show a chilling absence. No child in the county born on the 13th day of any month survived infancy during the orphanage's operation. The number was not only a curse, it was a covenant stitched into the flesh of the community itself. Yet still, the gates remained open. Still, the matron smiled. And the church, which should have been sanctuary, turned its eyes away. One priest confessed decades later that he had been summoned to bless the 13th cross on the cellar door. He refused. They locked him in the chapel for 3 nights. When he was released, his hair had gone white, his eyes sunken. He left the priesthood. His last words, written in a shaky hand, were, "13 is not a number. It is a hunger." It is said that if you walk the ruins today, the cellar door remains. The crosses are faded, but the grooves are still warm to the touch, as if freshly carved. And if you press your ear to the stone, you will hear what the priest heard. A heartbeat. Slow, steady. Waiting. The hunger did not die when the orphanage closed in the early 1900s. It lingered, carried like a stain into those who had touched its halls. Survivors who escaped young reported visions of shadowed corridors, dreams of children standing at the foot of their beds, silent, mouths sewn shut. Some took their own lives before reaching 13. Others lived, but each reported that their children, their grandchildren, would vanish without explanation near their 13th year. The covenant had spilled beyond the walls. One historian traced the lineage of orphans admitted between 1878 and 1899. Not a single descendant lived past 13. The bloodline itself was erased. It was as if the building had planted seeds, and each bore fruit only to be devoured before ripening. And through it all, the matrons left no graves. Their names fade from record, as though they dissolved with the children. Some claimed they were not women at all, but something wearing flesh as disguise, their veils hiding not modesty, but faces stretched too smooth, too perfect, eyes that gleamed like polished coal. The building still stands in ruin, but the covenant breathes through anyone who dares speak its history aloud. Even now, as you listen, you have already walked closer to its gates. And when you sleep tonight, do not count the hours. Do not mark the calendar. Do not whisper the forbidden number, because if you do, the cellar may hear you. The ruin was finally abandoned in the early 20th century, its windows shattered, its doors chained. But abandonment is not absence. Children still dared each other to creep near the gates at dusk, to touch the iron fence, to peer through the cracks in the boards. Every account was the same. They felt watched. Not the way you feel when a neighbor glances at you, but the deep, marrow-heavy knowledge that something unseen lingered, patient, measuring. Some said they saw pale faces in the upper windows, the reflections of children who could not have been there. Others heard bells toll 13 times, though no bell remained in the belfry. And then there were those who entered. Teenagers seeking thrills broke the locks, crept through the dust, carried lanterns or torches. Most came out shaken but alive. But always one did not return. And when the search parties combed the ruin, they found no trace, no shoe, no torn cloth, no blood. Only one thing remained, etched into the dust of the cellar floor. 13 small handprints pressed in a circle around the iron door. Local authorities called it hysteria, blamed teenage recklessness. But they never explained why every missing boy or girl had been within days of turning 13. By mid-century, historians began piecing together the fragments, poring over county ledgers, parish records, forgotten journals. One archivist, a woman named Margaret Hall, claimed she had found proof of a ritual embedded in the orphanage's foundation. She uncovered building plans from 1878 that revealed something horrifying. The cellar door was not an accident of design, but the very centerpiece. The orphanage had been built outward in 13 symmetrical wings, each measured with geometric precision, converging upon that subterranean spiral. It was not a place for children. It was an altar. Hall wrote letters to colleagues warning that the orphanage was part of a larger network, that other institutions of the same era followed similar patterns. 13-sided chapels, dormitories designed with rows of 13 beds. She suggested a hidden cult of benefactors who masked themselves as philanthropists while feeding something older, something buried. Weeks after sending those letters, she vanished. Her body was never found. Her last diary entry reads, "The door is not closed. It only waits." The survivors grew old, or tried to. Those who escaped before 13 often bore scars that no one could see. One man, decades later, told his grandson that he still dreamed of the cellar. He dreamed of children standing shoulder to shoulder, silent, their eyes hollow, their lips cracked as if stitched. And behind them, a figure that was not human, a shadow with 13 arms, each stretching out like branches. In his dreams, the arms reached for him, but he always woke before they touched. On the eve of his 79th birthday, he did not wake. His body was found rigid, his hand clutching a paper where he had written one sentence over and over. "I never reached 13. The meaning was unclear, but his family refused to speak of it again. His grandson later destroyed the house where he died, fearing the stain of the orphanage had followed them across generations. By the 1970s, urban explorers had rediscovered the orphanage. Photographs emerged, grainy and overexposed, showing hallways littered with broken pews, windows gaping like sockets. But one photograph circulated most, an image of the chapel. At first glance it showed only decay, but when enlarged, in the far corner, 13 figures appeared, faintly outlined, pale, standing in a row. They were children, each one expressionless, each one barefoot, and none of the explorers recalled seeing them at the time. The photograph was studied by experts who declared it a trick of light. But those who looked longest swore they saw the figures shifting slightly, their eyes following the viewer. The negative of the film was later destroyed in a fire, the photographer insisting he had not lit the match. The story should have ended there. Yet rumors spread that anyone who kept a copy of that image suffered nightmares. Some claimed their children began talking in their sleep, whispering prayers in the same jagged language once spoken in the cellar. And in every nightmare, the 13th figure stepped closer. Modern investigators entered with cameras, sensors, digital recorders. They expected to debunk legends, to expose superstition. But the recordings revealed something darker. In the cellar, beneath the iron door, the microphones picked up a sound. It was not static. It was not wind. It was a heartbeat. Slow, heavy, resonant through stone. The scientists argued over whether it was geological, the rhythm of shifting rock. But the beat counted to 12, paused, and then a 13th struck harder, louder, shaking the equipment until the devices cut out. When the team returned to their hotel, one member was missing. His bed was neatly made, his shoes placed at the edge, his wallet left behind. He had been days away from his 13th birthday, if you counted not from birth, but from the years since his own son had died. 13 years exactly. The orphanage had reached beyond blood, beyond age, twisting time itself to complete its covenant. And those who reviewed the tapes afterward swore they heard children's laughter layered beneath the 13th beat. You cannot erase hunger by chaining doors. You cannot silence it by abandoning walls. The orphanage rots, but rot breathes. And in the years since, those who entered unprepared felt its pull. A group of students from a nearby university broke in during the winter of 1993. They joked about ghosts, carried flashlights, smoked in the chapel. But their laughter fractured when one of them dared to count aloud to 13. He never reached the number. The others swore that on 12, the light bulbs cracked, the floorboards shook, and the air smelled of iron. By 13, he was gone. His friends screamed, searched, ripped open walls, pried up floorboards. They found nothing but the outline of 2 bare feet in the dust, as though pressed there moments before. The police dismissed their account. The case remains open, unsolved. The parents never celebrated another birthday. And so the legend sharpened. You do not count to 13 inside those walls. Because if you do, the walls count with you. There's a reason you are still listening. There's a reason the silence has followed you this far. Knowledge is not neutral. To learn the orphanage's history is to take part in it, to step closer to the iron door. And if you do not mark yourself, you risk being counted. This is why I must ask you, right now, to act as the survivors once did, to anchor yourself against what listens. Right? In the comments, twice the words 13 waits. Do not do it once. Do not do it 3 times. Twice. This ritual of repetition is the lock that keeps the cellar from noticing you. If you do not, then what once fed in Pennsylvania may feed in the silence of your own home. The survivors had no such shield. They lived with dread ticking inside their ribs like a second heart. One girl described hearing footsteps behind her for years, always stopping when she turned. She grew to adulthood, bore no children, refused to marry. On the eve of her 40th year, she locked herself inside her house, nailed the door shut. The neighbors heard her screaming as though a crowd of children surrounded her. When they broke in, the house was empty. Only the nails remained, bent outward from within. No one escapes forever. The covenant waits. There are symbols buried in the orphanage's structure. 13 crosses on the door, yes, but also 13 steps descending into the cellar, though the staircase itself spirals far beyond that. At the 13th step, the air changes, thicker, colder, vibrating with sound below human hearing. Some explorers claim their cameras malfunctioned at exactly that step, batteries draining to zero, screens frosting white. When the footage was recovered, the images showed children standing shoulder to shoulder in the stairwell, blocking the way. None of the explorers saw them at the time. Architectural historians later noted that the design of the orphanage mirrored pagan temples of antiquity, sanctuaries not for worship but for offerings. Its wings stretched like arms embracing, funneling all toward the center. And the center was not for prayer, not for shelter, but for feeding. The matrons had not built a refuge. They had built a mouth. One wonders how many more buildings hide the same geometry. One wonders how many doors with 13 marks wait beneath other forgotten institutions. The sound persists. Researchers who placed seismic monitors near the ruins reported anomalies, pulses in the earth, occurring every 13 minutes. They dismissed it as machinery until they realized no mine, no train, no factory stood within miles. They moved the monitors closer. The pulses grew stronger, and at the 13th strike, the ground trembled as though something beneath had shifted in its sleep. Villagers claimed the tremors shook their houses at night, rattled their dishes, woke their infants screaming. But the infants never cried for long. Some grew quiet, too quiet, refusing food, staring at corners with wide, hollow eyes. A few died before their 13th month. The pattern never broke. The covenant was not a relic. It was alive. And yet, no authority has dismantled the orphanage. No government has leveled it to the earth. Why? Perhaps they cannot. Perhaps the land resists, stone binding stone, walls rising again if touched. Local crews hired in the 1980s reported that their equipment failed within the first hour, metal teeth snapping, drills seizing, concrete cracking blades. One man lost his hand when a chain whipped loose. He swore, as blood sprayed across the ruins, that he heard children laughing. He never returned to work. Officials filed the failure as budgetary. But the truth lingers. The building will not fall. It does not permit itself to fall. Because hunger does not destroy itself. Hunger only waits. And the longer it waits, the deeper it roots into anyone who remembers, anyone who speaks, anyone who dares to listen past the 12th beat into the 13th. You have already begun. The strangest discovery came not from the ruin itself, but from archives buried in Harrisburg. A locked box, misfiled under mining accidents, contained letters exchanged between the orphanage matrons and men whose names reappear in Pennsylvania's political history. The letters were coded at first glance, phrases about bread deliveries, coal shipments, charity donations. But read carefully, each line carried patterns, 12 accounted for, the 13th erased. Children referred to as offerings of white cloth. The cellar called the well. And again, the repetition, 13 waits. What these letters revealed was that the orphanage was no accident. It was sanctioned. Its covenant was not merely tolerated, but upheld by men in suits who smiled at photographs, shook hands on courthouse steps. For them, the disappearance of children was not tragedy, but tithe. A payment to keep some deeper balance, some bargain inked in silence. No record shows how the matrons were chosen. No birth certificates. No family lines. They appear, veiled, already middle-aged, then vanish when the building closed. Some scholars believe they were not human at all, but vessels, faces draped over shadows like masks. But if so, then who answered the letters? One of those letters bore a date that chills the spine. October 13th, 1878, the year the orphanage opened. It spoke of the first sealing, of 12 steps taken and one door opened. What happened that night was never written in plain words, but the next morning, the first ledger line was drawn, recording a boy of 7 dead of lung fever. His burial record was missing. His name was crossed out, and from that date forward, the pattern was fixed. Every child beneath those gates was counted, measured, and swallowed before 13. The number was not superstition. It was law, not of God, not of man, but the covenant written into the stone. And each time the 13th toll came, each time the cellar door groaned, the town prospered, factories flourished, mines yielded coal, railroads expanded. It was as if the blood of children was mortar for industry, their silence fueling America's climb. This is the hidden history no textbook prints. That progress was not only sweat and steel, but sacrifice. And the altar stood in Pennsylvania. The ruin today stands in shadow, but those who trespass describe a terror deeper than ghosts. One wanderer, a man in his 40s, entered with nothing but a flashlight. He made it as far as the chapel. When he returned to his car hours later, his hair had gone white, his fingernails cracked with blood, as if clawed against stone. He would not speak of what he saw. The only words he ever whispered, over and over, were, "They were waiting for me." He died 13 days later, body rigid, eyes staring wide as though still seeing them. Another group brought dogs to explore. The animals refused to cross the threshold, growling, tails tucked, howling at the stairwell. One dog bolted into the night, never found again. The others lay shivering, refusing food for 13 hours. These are not myths. These are patterns stitched into every witness account like thread. And thread, when pulled, unravels. But why children? Why always children? And why never beyond 13? Some whisper it is because innocence is the purest offering, the most potent. Others say it is because children are closest to the threshold, their souls not yet fixed, easier to bend, easier to consume. But those who study the covenant most closely claim another reason. They say 13 is not an age at all. It is a gate. In ancient rites, 13 was the passage between worlds, the crossing point where flesh and spirit split. To take a child before that passage is to catch them soft, unformed, to bind their essence forever in servitude. To feed at that threshold is to feed not just on life but on becoming. The children of the orphanage were not killed. They were harvested, their unfinished selves stitched into the hunger beneath the door. And if this is true, then they are not gone. They are still there, waiting, trapped in a 13th hour that never ends. The whispers say you can hear them, not through microphones, not through tape, but with your own ears if you dare to stand in the ruin at night. Place your hand on the stone. Close your eyes. Wait for silence. And in that silence, you will hear the rustle of bare feet, the soft weeping of those who never grew older than 13. Some who tried this fled screaming, never the same. Others stayed too long. Their bodies were later found outside the gates, veins dark, skin pale as chalk, mouths stretched open as if something had crawled inside and emptied them. No inscription marks those graves. No priest blesses the earth. They are hidden among weeds, forgotten, just as the town once forgot the orphans. But the covenant remembers. And as long as a single soul speaks of the orphanage, as long as the number is counted, the cellar door is never fully closed. And tonight, you have heard its story. The ruin breathes differently when the moon is gone. Explorers who entered on moonless nights swore the halls bent longer, the ceilings pressed lower, as though the building reshaped itself. One man said the corridor to the chapel stretched for minutes, though it was only yards. He counted his steps. At 12, the boards groaned. At 13, the sound came not from beneath but above, as if something crawled the rafters. He ran, but the sound followed until he burst through the gates. Later, he checked the soles of his shoes. Dust clung in patterns, 13 small prints, layered one atop the other, pressed into the leather. What does it mean when a place is not a ruin but a presence? What does it mean when silence grows teeth? The orphanage is not dead. It has only changed its shape, learning to stretch, to follow, to cling. That is why those who speak its history feel it watching still. That is why your skin prickles now. Because you, too, have stepped into its corridor. And you cannot run from what has already heard your name. The journals of a physician once employed their surfaced in fragments. Torn pages, charred edges, but enough to reveal horror. He wrote that the children did not sicken naturally. Their bodies wasted as if drained, bones brittle, skin pale. He attempted transfusions, poultices, prayers. Nothing slowed it, and on each 12th birthday, he noted a strange mark forming near the heart, a faint circle, darkening daily until the 13th. On the eve, the child would tremble, cry out at night, speak languages they had never learned. And at dawn, their bed was empty. The physician begged the matrons for answers. They silenced him with threats, then promises of wealth if he ceased inquiry. He refused. Days later, his home burned. His bones were never identified, but his journals survived, hidden in the attic rafters of his office. His last words scrawled in panic. They're not dying. They're being taken whole. The 13th mark is the key. If the mark was real, then perhaps those children still exist, branded beyond our sight, stitched into a covenant that binds them forever to the cellar's hunger. Researchers with no fear of curses began mapping disappearances around the state. They found the pattern widened far beyond the orphanage. Children in nearby towns who reached their 12th year began vanishing in ways that defied reason. Some dissolved from locked rooms. Some wandered into woods, never to return. Some were found lifeless, mouths open in silent scream, with a faint circle etched above the heart. Always near 13, always unclaimed. The orphanage was not a single mouth. It was the largest, but not the only. The covenant radiated outward like rings in water, ripples spreading across counties, across generations. Perhaps the matrons fed more than one door. Perhaps the stone itself had learned hunger, replicating its geometry in secret places. If so, then what rose in Pennsylvania was only a fraction of something older, something continental, something global. And if so, then no one who hears this story is safe from being counted. The building resists time. This is the greatest proof of all. Wood should rot. Stone should crumble. Yet the orphanage stands, scarred but solid, as if refusing death. A historian who studied its beams found the timber bled sap when cut, though it had been felled a century before. Another claimed the stone walls pulsed faintly when touched, as if warm blood ran within. What feeds does not decay. What hungers does not wither. The orphanage is alive, and those who dwell within it are not ghosts in the common sense. They are not echoes or shades. They are trapped in perpetual offering, fragments of lives paused on the edge of 13, stitched into the fabric of the building itself. They do not fade because they are not permitted to fade. They are fuel. That is why the ruin endures. That is why silence there is heavier than stone, because silence is the sound of swallowing. The deepest fear is not that children vanished. The deepest fear is that they were transformed, that behind the iron door, the cellar reshaped them, made them part of itself. Survivors dreamed of children with hollow eyes, but not always weeping, sometimes smiling as though proud to belong. One described seeing his brother in a dream, standing tall, but his limbs too long, his arms 13 in number. He whispered, "I am still here. Come join us." The man woke screaming, hair wet with blood from clawing his scalp. If the covenant was to harvest innocence, then what it returned was something no longer innocent, something made in the image of hunger itself. The children did not perish. They became. They became the watchers in the walls, the footsteps on the stairs, the laughter in the cellar. They became the 13th. And once you become the 13th, you never leave. Those who dared stay through the night described the orphanage as shifting into a mouth. The halls tightened, air thickened, windows blackened with soot though no fire burned. At midnight, the bells that no longer exist were heard tolling. 1, 2, until 12. The 13th toll never sounded. Instead came silence so deep that ears bled. And in that silence, every child's voice rose together. Not crying, chanting, a hymn not of earth, repeating in cadence too perfect for human tongues. The explorers who heard were not the same. One never spoke again, only drew circles in ash. Another drowned himself in a shallow pond, body found curled like a fetus. And one man, before leaping from a bridge, shouted a single phrase, "The 13th does not end, it begins." This is not folklore. These are police reports, eyewitness accounts, hidden under bureaucratic ink. But they exist, and their consistency is undeniable. There is a truth darker than all we have uncovered. The covenant was never broken. When the orphanage closed, the hunger did not. Children continue to vanish, not in clusters, but quietly, invisibly, swallowed by the 13th hour. Their names erased from census, their faces fading from photographs. Parents remember, but their neighbors do not. Graves are dug but never filled, and in every account, the circle mark returns. The faint imprint above the heart, as though branded by invisible flame. Some whisper this mark is spreading, not just to children, but to anyone who dares listen too closely. To anyone who dares trace the number beyond its edge. If you have listened this far, you have stepped into the circle. You have heard the chant. You have been counted. And the 13th waits for those who are counted. This is not a warning. This is inevitability. Close your eyes and imagine the gates. Rusted iron, chained but never locked. You push them open and step inside. The air is damp, heavy, almost sweet. The building leans toward you, as though eager. You hear the scuff of bare feet above. You hear the hymn, faint, building. And then you see them, rows of children, pale, smiling, eyes dark hollows. They reach for you with 13 fingers, whispering your name though you never gave it. They do not ask you to stay. They tell you that you already have. And when you turn to flee, you find the gates gone. Only stone. Only silence. Only the 13th hour beginning. Now you understand why no child survived 13. If you have the courage, pass this story on, subscribe, share, comment. But do not write your own name. Write only the circle, draw only the 13th, so the covenant does not bind you directly. Share it as a shadow, a whisper, so the hunger feeds but does not find you first. You were never meant to hear this. But now that you have, you are part of it. Guard your silence. Guard your sleep. And if you hear the 13th toll, do not answer. Because some doors, once opened, never close.